Chosen one, anchor your spirit to what I am about to say right now. That voice in your head telling you that your kindness is weakness, silence it. The enemy is working overtime against you this week for one reason and one reason only. He knows what gets unleashed when you finally reach your limit. It all shifts now. The confusion about who you are, the exhaustion of being misread, the warfare against your character. But here is what you need to hear clearly. It is not shifting because you finally snapped. It is shifting because of every single moment you chose not to. Think back to that moment this week when someone pushed you past what most people would have tolerated. When they took your silence for surrender, when they mistook your patience for permission. You did not know it then, but that restraint was not retreat. That was the most dangerous thing you have ever done to your enemy. You did not lose that moment. You loaded a weapon. You did not find this message by accident. The Holy Spirit brought you here. This is a divine appointment. You are standing at a threshold. Stay until the very last second, because in the next few minutes I am going to hand you the decree that exposes why your kindness is the most lethal force the enemy has ever encountered. I am going to walk you through the moment your restraint became your greatest act of spiritual warfare. And at the end, I am going to give you the declaration that seals this truth into your identity, so the enemy can never use your gentleness against you again. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. It has not just been heavy, it has been personal. Like the pressure was specifically designed to find every soft place in you and press directly into it. Maybe you were lying in bed this week, running a conversation back through your mind, rehearsing everything you could have said, asking yourself why you stayed quiet when they deserved every word you held back. Or maybe someone in your life looked directly at your patience and called it passivity, called it cowardice, and something deep inside you stirred not in anger, in recognition. You feel it, do you not? That stillness beneath the surface, that silence that has weight to it, that knowing that if you ever fully released what lives inside you, the room would never be the same. And in this season, the enemy has been whispering a very specific lie. He has been telling you that your niceness has cost you, that you have been too good, too forgiving, too available, and that people have taken advantage of every open door your gentleness created. He is replaying that moment, the one where you extended grace and got nothing in return, the one where you protected someone who later used that same protection against you. The accuser is calling that foolishness. He is telling you that your goodness has been your greatest liability, and that if you had been harder, colder, less merciful, you would be further ahead right now. But I need you to hear what Scripture actually says about who you are. Proverbs 30:30 speaks of the lion, which is mighty among beasts, and does not retreat before any. And the Spirit of God does not give you a spirit of timidity, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Listen to that pairing, power and love. Not power or love. Not power despite love. Power through love, with a sound mind directing both. The enemy has been lying to you about your own architecture. He has convinced you that your compassion and your strength are in conflict, that the softer you are, the less dangerous you become. But that is the deception. A person who has never developed the capacity for love cannot be trusted with power. And a person who has never developed the capacity for power cannot fully protect what they love. You are both, fully. The heaviness you feel is not the weight of being too much. It is not the burden of a spirit that has been too open, too forgiving, too present for people who did not deserve it. The heaviness you feel is the weight of a force that has been compressed for so long that the release, when it comes, will not look like rage. It will look like authority. You think the moments you chose peace were moments you surrendered ground, but let me reframe your reality right now. Every time you absorbed what should have broken you and kept moving, You were not losing, you were being sharpened. Every time you stayed quiet, when the room expected you to fracture, you were not being defeated, you were being prepared. The most dangerous version of you is not the version that reacts. It is the version standing right here, right now, that has been through everything you have been through and still chose to remain, still chose integrity, still chose to lead with love, while carrying the full knowledge of what you are capable of when that love is tested. That is not weakness. That is a level of self-mastery that most people never reach, and that the enemy fears more than anything you could have done in anger. There is a type of person the world has consistently misread. They walk softly, they speak with care, they absorb pain quietly, without spectacle, without complaint. They are the ones who notice when someone's eyes carry sadness that their smile is trying to conceal. They give generously, not from overflow, but sometimes from their last reserves, because something in them cannot witness a need and walk past it. And because they do not erupt, because they do not retaliate, because they extend grace in spaces where most people would extend fists, the world looks at them and calls them weak, calls them naive, calls them easy targets. But here is what the world does not understand. The ocean is calm until it is not, and when it moves, when it truly moves, it reshapes coastlines. The same water that laps gently at the shore on a summer afternoon carries within it the memory of every storm that ever crossed its surface. Patience and power are not opposites. In nature, they are almost always the same thing, wearing different expressions depending on the season. You are not gentle because you lack power. You are gentle because you have learned to govern it. There is a difference between someone who cannot fight and someone who has chosen not to. One is empty, the other is a reservoir. Think about Moses. The Bible calls him the meekest man on earth. Not the weakest, the meekest. The Hebrew word used carries the image of a trained war horse, an animal of enormous power and speed, capable of tremendous force, but disciplined, responsive, submitted to the hand of its rider. That is meekness, not the timid child in the corner, not the doormat absorbing every boot, the trained force, the governed strength. Meekness is not the absence of strength. It is strength submitted to purpose. Moses had already proven he could deliver a lethal blow. The fire was always in him. The capacity for decisive, forceful action was never absent. But the man who could physically take a life was the same man chosen to carry the law of life down a mountain. His restraint was not cowardice, it was a covenant. It was the evidence that he could be trusted not just with power, but with holy power. And when heaven finally released him to move, Egypt shook. Pharaoh's entire empire, its military, its economy, its religious structure, was dismantled by a man the world had written off as a fugitive shepherd with a speech impediment. The same is true of you, but here is where it goes deeper. Because your gentleness is real, your kindness is not a strategy. It comes from a place that has genuinely been cracked open by experience, by loss, by love, by the kind of pain that either destroys you or expands you. You have sat in rooms where the grief was so thick it had weight. You have loved people who did not know how to receive love without damaging it. You have stayed when leaving would have been easier, forgiven when bitterness would have been justified, and rebuilt yourself with hands still shaking from the last collapse. You chose expansion. Every single time. Grace over grievance, growth over the comfortable numbness of shutting down. And that expansion, that hard-won, scar-tissued, beautifully earned capacity to hold complexity without collapsing, that is where your dangerous nature lives. Most people are predictable because they are reactive. They respond to offense with offense, pain with pain, push with push. They are essentially mirrors reflecting back whatever energy arrives without filtering, without choosing, without the crucial pause between stimulus and response. And the world knows how to manage predictable people. It knows their buttons. It knows their breaking points. Predictable people can be neutralized, but a person who absorbs, who processes, who remains centered even when being provoked, that person cannot be controlled. And what cannot be controlled will always be feared. The reason you have been provoked so relentlessly is not random. There is something in the spiritually perceptive, something in the person who walks with unusual grace that activates a very specific kind of opposition. There is a targeting that happens to souls of a certain depth, a certain assignment, a certain unawakened magnitude. Not because you are threatening to become something, because you already are something. The blueprint is already written. The capacity is already present. The calling is already sealed. And the forces designed to keep certain souls from rising, they can sense that. They may not be able to name it. They may not even consciously understand why they feel compelled to diminish you. But something in them responds to something in you, the way darkness responds to the approach of light. Not with welcome, but with resistance. They press where others would not even think to press. They find with uncanny precision the exact places where you are still healing, the exact wounds that have not yet fully closed. Why? Because your breakthrough, when it comes, will not just be yours. It will release something around you. It will give permission to every person watching your life to believe that their own transformation is possible. And that is precisely what must be delayed, undermined, discouraged at every possible turn. Here is what actually happens inside a person who has been consistently kind in the face of provocation. Something begins to build that has no equivalent in the natural world. You develop a kind of interior fire that cannot be fabricated, manufactured by ambition or desire, or imitated. It is forged, like a blade is forged, through repeated application of heat and pressure and precise, deliberate shaping. The blacksmith does not apologize to the metal for the temperature of the furnace. The heat is not the enemy of the blade. The heat is the architect of it. Every time you chose grace when you wanted to retaliate, you were being shaped. Every time you showed up with love when contempt would have been understandable, another layer was being burned away. You may have called it survival in those moments. Heaven called it preparation. Think about David before Goliath, before the valley, before the anointing oil, before any public recognition. There were the fields, the long, unglamorous, unwitnessed work of a shepherd boy doing his job in the middle of nowhere. There was the bear and the lion, and David faced both alone in obscurity, with nothing to prove to anyone but himself and God. He was not just protecting sheep in those moments. He was becoming someone. He was learning the texture of his own courage. He was building a reference library of personal testimony that no one else could write for him and no one else could take from him. And by the time he stood in front of a giant that had paralyzed an entire trained army, David was not drawing on courage alone. He was drawing on a history of private victories that no one else had witnessed. He was not being brave in that valley. He was being faithful to a pattern already established in the dark. The lion and the bear were not obstacles to his destiny, they were the construction of it. Your private battles, the ones you fought alone, in the dark, with no applause, with no one aware of how much it cost you just to get out of bed some mornings and choose to try again, those are your lion and your bear. Every relationship that broke you open, and yet somehow you survived. Every betrayal you processed without becoming bitter. Those moments were not wasted, they were not detours. They were the curriculum, and they are why you can stand when others fall. But let me challenge you, because this is where it gets uncomfortably honest. You have been using your kindness correctly, but have you been using your fire correctly? Because there is a version of gentleness that is pure and grace-filled, the kind that comes from genuine abundance. And then there is a version that is actually fear, wearing the costume of virtue, a version that has learned to speak the language of spirituality while quietly serving the agenda of self-protection. That calls itself peacekeeping when it is actually self-erasure. That says, I do not want to hurt anyone, when the deeper, more honest truth is I am terrified of what happens if I fully show up, because the last time I did, it was used against me. There is a specific kind of person who has spent so long being the most understanding person in every room that they have slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly stopped understanding themselves. You have been so busy making space for everyone else's journey that you have barely begun your own. You have translated other people's pain with fluency, while your own has been sitting in a corner, speaking a language you keep promising to learn but never quite find the time for. You have extended compassion in every direction except inward. God is waiting for you to turn that same grace on yourself. Not as a reward, not as something you earn once you have helped enough people, but right now, today, as an act of radical spiritual obedience to the truth that you were made in the image of something whole. And wholeness begins by being honest about the parts of yourself you have been too afraid to face. When you are truly provoked, pushed against, in the places where you are still tender, and you do not react from wounding, but from wholeness, something extraordinary occurs. Something shifts in the atmosphere of the room. Your response is no longer just a response. It becomes a statement. It becomes a demonstration. It becomes living proof of something that the world around you cannot explain and therefore cannot dismiss. Because the world has categories for anger, categories for retaliation, categories for the breaking point. It does not have a category for someone who has every reason to shatter and instead remains whole. When a person who has every reason to be bitter is not bitter, that is not just impressive, that is prophetic. This is why Paul wrote from prison, not despite his chains, but through them. The man who had been beaten, shipwrecked, stoned, abandoned, and imprisoned found a way to write about joy that has outlasted every empire that ever tried to silence him. The limitation became the amplification. The chains that were supposed to end his influence became the context that gave his words their unshakable authority. Because when a man can write about peace from a prison cell, you cannot argue with his peace. People who should have been writing his eulogy ended up reading his letters for 2,000 years, and they are still reading them. Your provocation is not punishment. It is positioning. The very thing that has been pressing against you has been pressing you into a shape that will serve a purpose larger than the pressing. You are not just going through it. You are going through it so that you can come through it in a way that leaves a door open for someone who is still standing at the entrance of the same darkness, wondering if there is any possibility of the other side. The thing that has been holding you back is not the people who provoked you. It is not the environment that tried to diminish you. It is your own unresolved relationship with your power. You have seen what you are capable of. Not just physically, not just intellectually, but spiritually, emotionally, and somewhere deep inside, you made a quiet agreement that you would limit yourself. Not as a conscious, deliberate choice, but as a slow and subtle accommodation to the reality of having been hurt. Because full power felt unsafe. Because the last time you were fully yourself, someone weaponized it. Someone saw your depth and mistook it for vulnerability. Someone encountered your light and, rather than being illuminated by it, tried to extinguish it. And for a season, it worked. Because somewhere between the person you were born as and the person the world shaped you to be, you learned that it was safer to be smaller. You learned that dimming your own light preemptively was less painful than having someone else dim it for you. And that logic made sense once. It protected you when protection was what you needed. But you are not in that place anymore. And the strategy that kept you safe in one season is the very thing strangling your expansion in this one. Your gentleness was never the ceiling. It was the foundation, the ground floor, of something that was always meant to rise. God never asked you to choose between being kind and being powerful. That was a false binary handed to you by people who needed you to believe it, so they could remain comfortable in the presence of something they could not contain. The real invitation is to be both completely, simultaneously, without apology and without explanation. To be the ocean at rest and the ocean in motion. To be the voice that builds and the voice that confronts. To be the hands that heal and the hands that refuse to be shaken. To be tender without being fragile. To be fierce without being cruel. To be soft in the places that require softness, and steel in the places that require steel. And to trust yourself finally, completely, to know the difference. If this message found you today, it was not by accident. The fact that you are still here, still willing to sit with this truth and let it do its work in you, that is not coincidence. That is correspondence. That is God confirming something He has been trying to say to you for a long time through 1,000 different moments. Share it with someone who has been called too sensitive, too kind, too quiet. They need to hear this. The person in your life who gives everything and receives so little, who keeps showing up with grace when grace is not being returned. Send this to them. Because some messages need a human hand to carry them to the person they were meant for. Your breakthrough is not coming. It is already here. Walk into it.